Hello everybody, welcome to Gordon the Cartoon. I'm here. I did put my shirt on. I was actually trying to get some of the last rays of late summer or early autumn, glass half full, glass half empty, however you want to look at it. But here I am in the upper reaches of the manor, and I wanted to talk about the age of independence. That's what I'm going to call it. I don't know if there is any official term for that period. But we're talking about the period of the 1940s to the 1960s, somewhere around there, when previous subject nations of the British Empire began to gain independence, began to protest, sometimes began to violently uprise and say, we don't want to be under the crown anymore, we don't want the British ruling us, we want a right to self-determination. And that resulted in agreements to leave said nations, whether that's Ghana or Kenya or India, and to hand it over to a interim administration and say, okay, all right, get what you want, you can have self-government and self-determination. And again, I'm just putting this out there as a debate. I'm not actually advocating anything in particular right now. But I do want to point out the fact, which I think is fairly salient, which is they didn't actually gain independence because all they did was exchange one government for another government. So they were governed by the British, and for example in India they were then governed by the Nehru administration. So it wasn't a government of the people, it was a government of the government. And today it is still a government of the government, who are in many of these nations very autocratic. I'd even say in many ways more autocratic than the British Empire ever was. So, you know, you realize there's agitation behind these things. There was a possible burning of bridges on the part of the empire, assaulting of the field, so to speak. But a lot of, you know, these nations, they didn't just, you know, it wasn't this kind of socialist utopian experience where the people were just happily plowing the fields together and sharing the crops and stuff, and, you know, swinging on the bridges the British built and stuff and diving off in the river. No, they just got another government. In many cases I'd say were actually worse. Self-interested governments, which most are, governments that went on to oppress them, went on to abuse them, and continued often to funnel the resources of those nations to the West for massive kickbacks and bribes and a whole host of a gift basket of immoral incentives, basically. So, for example, do you think India now is better off, pointing out the fact it's probably got the biggest rich poor divide in the world, it's heavily prejudiced based on the Hindu caste system. You can go on holiday to Goa and you'll see street children rummaging through the trash for something to eat or sell. We'd say that India is not in a great state. It's classed as a third world or developing country. I don't know how long you have to give a country to develop to call it still developing or not. But is it better off now than if the British had maintained rule over it? Bearing in mind that the British Empire brought infrastructure, it brought education, it brought medicine, it brought a form of law and order, it brought missionaries and the gospel, the Christian message. And again, I'm not advocating that the empire is perfect, because no empire is. In fact, in history, empires have been pretty mean. I'd in fact say that the British Empire has been the most benevolent empire of all time. If you compare it to the Ottomans, or the Assyrians, or the Romans, for example, the marauding, raping, murdering, stick you on a spike kind of people, which lead most empires throughout history, in fact all of them. I'd say the British Empire is pretty benevolent. But let me say this, had the empire kept its government at the time, which was much more conservative than it is now, I'm not talking about today's British government, which are a disgrace, a grifting, globalist, socialist, seditious mess that is going to soon, very soon come a cropper of the people, hopefully non-violently. So if the British Empire, as was, continued to rule, stayed with the same kind of character to this point, would India be better off or worse off than it is under its succession of governments since independence? I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. I'm just putting it out there. Again, I said I'm not trying to take a position here. I just feel like we've been sold a certain version of history about independence of nations, about the British Empire and how apparently completely wicked to the core it was, and it did no good but oppress and enslave. But just scratch the surface a bit and you'll just find that this is all Marxist tropes and just talking points that Marxists like to throw forward, even though they are fiercely imperialistic. I mean, look at China. When will they take over Taiwan? Who knows? Fiercely imperialistic. Look at the Soviet Union. Took over the whole of Eastern Europe. Fiercely imperialistic. I don't want to hear a word out of the mouth of a Marxist, because you have shed more blood than any doctrine in history, and you have taken over many nations and spread your empires. But that's a side note. So let me know what you think in the comments. If the British Empire continued, and again I say hypothetically continued, with the same ethos it had in Victorian times and Edwardian Georgian times, I'm talking about the 20th century Edward and George, until its real collapse by the 60s, would those nations be better off if India was still the jewel in the crown? Would Kenya be better off if it hadn't gone through the disastrous dictatorship of Daniel Arap Moi and tens of thousands of Kenyans, including some of my friends, fleeing for their lives and their freedom, and now the growing dictatorship of William Ruto, also of the Kalenjin tribe? Would Kenya be better off? Yes, it's developed, but would the development have been faster? Who knows? I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. Let me know what you think in the comments. Was the independence of the nations of the British Empire really independence, or was it just surrender to another form of government that ultimately seems to be, on the whole, negative? Not a government of the people, not beneficial for the population, but just another set of people who are self-interested and want to control and monetize rather than serve the citizens of their nation. Let me know. Please like, share and subscribe. Catch you next time on Gordon of Khartoum.